here we go. First time ever supersized throwdown. 3 classic 70s KISS records. Rock and Roll Over versus Destroyer versus Love Gun. You can pick only one. What's it going to be? Without a doubt, of these 3 records, Destroyer is the biggest commercially, the one they play the most, the one radio plays, the one the band plays, and the one that's double the sales of either of the other two. So that's always interesting when you look at it. And that ties into why people call up here or anywhere constantly and say, why doesn't a band play deep tracks or songs from other records? Well, there's your proof. Because to the mainstream, which is what these bands are playing to when they tour, they've got to do the songs everybody knows and the crowd pleasers for the most part. And that's just how it works. Now, again, of the 365,000 people, I mean, I wouldn't call that super mainstream anyway, because if you're following me, you got to be a rock fan, I would think. But still, it speaks volumes. It really does. Let's go to Norm in Maryland next up on the phones with his thoughts. Rock and Roll Over, Destroyer, Love Gun. Norm, what do you got?
Hey, Eddie. So we're around the same age. And when I was, a preteen teen, I was into Elton John and David Bowie. And I got a copy of Destroyer, and it flipped the switch for me and just blew me away, and I never looked back. But then, moving on, got Rock and Roll Over, and Rock and Roll Over for me went to a next level. And my vote is definitely for Rock and Roll Over.
There's such different records, different producer, different sound, just so different, but yeah, Rock and Roll Over is just more of the KISS-sounding record, which is exactly why I think even though Destroyer was so successful, they went and got Eddie Kramer, who did Alive, and they said, let's make a raw rock record that sounds like the band we were on Alive, but in the studio.
So I have a quick question for you, Eddie. Of the 3 albums, were there any carryover songs? So, did they have a pool of albums? A pool of songs, and that could have been on either of the 3 albums?
You mean was everything written at the time for the records?
Yeah. So because they're so close in time to each other, did they have a bunch of songs left over from Destroyer that they brought over to Rock and Roll Over or to Love Gun?
I really don't know. I mean, if you get into listening to some of these special editions or box sets or demos, there's maybe some of that. Thank you, Norm. But Bob Ezrin had a huge hand in the writing on Destroyer, which he often does get involved in songwriting on records he produces. And yeah, I think Destroyer is kind of like its own thing. When it came to Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, I think they were writing go out on the road, write, come in with the songs you had. There's been a lot of people that have said, why haven't there been box sets on Rock and Roll Over or Destroyer or deluxe editions of these, these really expansive deluxe editions? Well, in order to put stuff out, you have to have it. And if they were just under the gun at the pace things were going then, where it's like, we're on the road 6 months in support of Rock and Roll Over, but we know we got to go in the studio in 3 months and make a follow-up. You're writing and you're just writing the 9-10 songs you need to make another record. So I don't think there was a lot of overwriting. I don't know, but it would feel like there's not. But when you look at the track listing on Destroyer, Detroit Rock City written by Ezrin and Paul Stanley. King of the Nighttime World, Ezrin, Paul Stanley, Kim Fowley, Mark Anthony. Again, that song is a rewrite that was recorded earlier. God of Thunder, Paul Stanley. Great Expectations, Simmons, Ezrin. Flaming Youth, Simmons, Stanley, Ace Frehley, Ezrin. Sweet Pain, Simmons. Shout It Out Loud, Simmons, Stanley, Ezrin. Beth, Peter Criss, Stan Penridge, Ezrin. Do You Love Me, Kim Fowley, Ezrin, Stanley. Bob Ezrin has writing credit on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 songs. Of the 9 songs on Destroyer, Ezrin co-wrote 6 of them. The only solo writing credits on the whole record God of Thunder, Paul Stanley, which always blows people's minds that Paul wrote that song, not Gene, and Sweet Pain, soul writer Gene. That's it. So Ezrin is all over Destroyer in so many ways. There was no way they could create like that because Ezrin wasn't involved in the next two records. So I think Destroyer is singularly about the Ezrin sound and the production and him and his contributions to those songs. Like that guitar melody in Detroit Rock City and the guitar solo, that was written by Ezrin on a piano. Here's Steve in South Carolina. Go ahead, Steve.
How you doing today? You doing all right?
Yeah, man, thank you.
I like Rock and Roll Over. Definitely is my favorite old school KISS album. It's the first one I bought. I backtracked because I'm 51. I backtracked to get the first albums. And I got it from a record store. If people don't realize what those were, you go in there and there's 5,000 records. And you go through and you find. But I got it out of the bin where the little chip was cut out of the cover.
Cutouts.
And it was like a buck or $1.50 or whatever. And that's the first one I backtracked and got. But my first live bought album was definitely Lick It Up or Heaven's on Fire album. My friend
Animalize.
Mark St. John on guitar for his.
Animalize, yeah. So what's your pick of these three, Steve?
It's Rock and Roll Over. I mean, that drum breakdown and Making Love right there, which is almost like a micro drum solo Peter did, that's badass, man.
Yeah, an amazing solo from Ace, a blazing solo from Ace on Making Love. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Max in Orlando. Go ahead, Max.
Hey, I'm going to have to go with Rock and Roll Over on this one.
Rock and Roll Over. All right, Max, your phone sounds underwater, but thank you. We'll put you down for Rock and Roll Over. Let's go to Mike in Cincinnati. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm going with Destroyer. I just think the combination of the record cover and Bob Ezrin's production work, I just think it's stellar compared to the other two. And Beth was their first hit. And I just think it's Peter Criss's best drumming, in my opinion, was on Destroyer.
Yeah, Peter's drumming definitely goes to another level on Destroyer, and we know that Ezrin really worked him on it. I think Peter's playing on the next two records as well is great. I mean, when you think about the song Love Gun, that, and thanks, Mike, that's a signature KISS song. That drum pattern is so iconic. And to this day, bands end songs having nothing to do with KISS or KISS songs with that drum pattern. I've seen a million bands do that. It's so difficult, but it's so much fun to pull apart. Here's Mark in San Antonio. Hey, Mark.
Hey, what's going on, man? Congrats on 40 fabulous years, bud.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, you got it. Hey, this is like trying to pick your favorite kids, man. It's all three of them are fabulous. My all-time favorite KISS song is Detroit Rock City from Destroyer. I love that song. It was the first song that really introduced me to KISS. But hands down, I got to go with Rock and Roll Over. It is by far, top to bottom, not a single skip on the album. And it's definitely the one that I pretty much fell in love with. Because I grew up as an 80s KISS fan. I'm only 50 years old, so my first KISS album was Crazy Nights. And that's probably the only KISS fan to say their first KISS album is Crazy Nights. But I love Rock and Roll Over, and just by far the best KISS album, studio album in my opinion.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. That's another part of this is where you jumped in. If you're younger, you might have discovered all these records 10, 15 years after they came out. You may have a different perspective on it. So you're maybe looking at it as through a little bit of a different lens at that point. Here's Jerry in Pennsylvania joining us right now. Go ahead, Jerry.
Hi, Eddie. I want to correct one thing, though. Early in the show, you said to a caller, the woman from Pontiac, about the event they did. That actually happened in Cadillac, which is a different part of the state.
Oh, you're right. You're right, Jerry. Cadillac, Pontiac. I was the wrong place, but you're 100% right. Thank you.
Okay. My pick, Rock and Roll Over, for Take Me Alone. I think it might be their best song.
That riff is unbelievable.
It really is.
All right, we'll put you down for Rock and Roll Over. Thank you, Jerry, and thank you for the correction. You are 100% right on that. Cadillac High. Cadillac. Shame on me. I just lost a point in my KISS cred. At least they're both cars. Jeff in Pennsylvania. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, Eddie. Happy New Year's, man.
You too.
And, hey, Richard, this is your dad. Shout out Richard Christie. Hey,
I don't know if Richard's hardcore into. I don't know if Richard's hardcore into 70s Kiss. Richard, I know you're listening. Text me if you have a pick on this. I don't know where I don't know if he's a big Kiss guy actually, but be interesting.
I don't think he is, but
yeah.
I'm sure he'll have an opinion.
Yeah.
I gotta go. Well, first of all, like your last caller said, this is like picking your favorite child because you've got like 3 iconic album covers, 3 great albums. But for me, I got to go with Love Gun because I would rather listen to Then She Kissed Me for 24 hours straight before I listen to Great Expectations again. And Rock and Roll Over is amazing too. But I mean, like you said, it's picking your kids, but got to go with Love Gun.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Let me read. John 5 obviously is not going to be able to call in, but here's what he texted me. Love Gun was my very first record, so that's very important to me. Then I would go Rock and Roll Over, Destroyer. So John 5's picks Love Gun at 1, even though we're not ranking, but he's ranking it. Love Gun, because it was his first, Rock and Roll Over, Destroyer. Interesting. John 5 with Destroyer in the 3-hole. Very controversial. Now go back to learning Motley Crue songs, John. Also, Roger, our program director who called in earlier, wow, Roger's getting really geeky here. I did not know this at all. Roger's claiming that on Love Gun, there's a guy named Jimmy Marlin who played the conga drum on Almost Human. Jesus Christ. Because I said earlier there were no ghost musicians on Rock and Roll Over or Love Gun. Roger's saying somebody played a conga on Almost Human. He would know. I'm not going to argue with him. But man, is that an asterisk, a tiny asterisk. That's hysterical. Davis in Virginia. Go ahead, buddy.
Hey, Eddie. Thank you for taking my call. And all you need listeners out there, Eddie Trump is the most coolest Kiss record throwdown cat in the history of the highway.
Thank you, Davis. What's your pick, buddy? Get that radio turned down. We're hearing you come back to us.
I ain't got nothing on. Sorry.
I'm hearing a rebound. So give me your pick real quick.
My pick is going to be Love Gun.
All right, Davis. I'm only letting you go quick because when you hear this back, you'll hear your phone was repeating on us. Davis, log Davis for a Love Gun pick. Steve in Alabama. Go ahead, Steve.
Hey, Eddie. How you doing today?
Great. What's your pick, man?
I'm going to go with Rock and Roll Over because, to me, with the other 2 albums, Destroyer and Love Gun, which I think they're both are good albums, there's some clunkers on there to me, and there isn't any on Rock and Roll Over. In my opinion, it's just a better record. And also, by the way, the first album I ever got was Destroyer. I got it on 8-track. And then I got the actual LP of Rock and Roll Over, and I still have the sticker that came with that record.
I'm curious, Steve, because we talked about this. When you got to throw a record or 2 out, everybody finds something that's like their perceived clunker to do that. What would you say your clunkers were on Destroyer and Love Gun?
It would be Great Expectations. Not a big fan of Flamin' Youth.
Ooh. That one hurt. I love Flaming Youth, but okay.
And, you know, I don't like the cover really on the Love Gun. I could do without it.
And that, you have a clunker on Love Gun? What, the cover? Then She Kissed Me?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate you weighing in. I love Flaming Youth. Great Expectations is the song taking the hits on Destroyer, which is interesting because I would have almost thought the song that would take the hit on Destroyer would be Beth. Not because it's a bad song, and of course it's an enormous hit, but because it was so different for KISS. Again, there's nobody on that song but Peter Criss singing. The guitar is played by like Dick Wagner. There's no drums on the song. It's an orchestrated song. We all know it's an enormous hit, but it was like against all odds. It was a B-side that got turned over. So that's nobody's talking about Beth in this whole equation, which is just such an outlier for KISS, but again, an enormous hit. And a hit's a hit. Here's Steve in Los Angeles. Steve, I hope you're staying dry. What's your pick?
Hey, Eddie. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, man.
First of all, I'm gonna say I agree with John 5. Really? It's not.
Steve, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
You said so your pick's Love Gun?
Yeah, I agree with John 5.
All right, thank you, Steve. LA's getting hit with rain and storms, all of California, so we joke about people freaking out about rain when it happens in California, but I know it actually is causing problems and flooding and stuff. So seriously, on a serious note, hope everybody's cool out there and doesn't have any problems, because they don't get rain. And when they do, they get a sprinkle, they go crazy, but they're getting hit for a couple days now. And again, it's desperately needed, but I know it's causing problems. So he sounded like he was underwater there for a second, but we got him down for Love Gun. Let's go to Chris in Jersey. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Eddie, how you doing?
Great. What's your pick?
I'm going to go with Rock and Roll Over. That's the one that really embodies the live sound of the band. It's not overproduced like Destroyer, and it's tough to say. I don't want to say anything negative about Destroyer, but Love Gun just embodies everything that was right about the band. But just to touch on one quick thing about Destroyer, a lot of people really forget, and you were just talking about Beth, Destroyer was not the big hit that it was. It fell off the charts completely after just 20 weeks, and riding off the success of Alive. That's a disappointment. So it fell completely off the charts, and then when Beth became a single, it came back for 58 more weeks on the charts. So it's impossible to understate the importance of Beth and how much it meant to them.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm looking for it. There's a great book about Destroyer. I forget who wrote it. It may have been, because there's been so many KISS books, it may have been James Campion. I'm not sure. We had him on to promote it, and I forget the name of the book. But there's a book that was written totally about the creation of Destroyer. And I don't think, and I mentioned this at the top of the show, I don't think people realize how Destroyer was like, they were in panic mode when it came out because people rebelled against it because it was such a non-KISS sounding record. Remember, they broke on Alive, this raw, live, bombastic record, and then they served up Destroyer, this most polished thing. They were second guessing themselves. They were freaking. They were panicking. All of this is documented in this book. And then he's right. They turn over Detroit Rock City. Beth becomes this multi-format hit, and suddenly Destroyer's a masterpiece. But they didn't want to chance that again, which is exactly why Rock and Roll Over is a counter to the polish of Destroyer. All right, before I run out of time here, why don't you, Joel, jump in and give me the stats you have so far?
Okay, so far, it looks like Rock and Roll Over is leading the way. We've got 17 votes on air for Rock and Roll Over. We've got 10 votes for Destroyer and 5 for Love Gun.
So those are of the people we took on the air.
Correct. So
and
anybody
did
who's
Russell
following
take
along,
anybody that didn't get on the air, or these people that are flashing, we don't know them, right?
Yes, and Russell has taken everybody's tally, whether, they a couple of people texted him, everybody who's called in and didn't make it to air may have dropped off, didn't get on. Russell has been taking that tally as well, and the last one he posted was 19 votes for Rock and Roll Over, 12 votes for Destroyer, and 10 votes for Love Gun.
Hey, Joel? We got 19 for Rock and Roll Over, now 14 for Destroyer, and 11 for Love Gun. That's the latest.
It's like a runoff here. This is like crazy. It's like we're in Georgia at the midterms. All right, so let me go to my Twitter, and because this has only been up like 20 minutes, but obviously way easier to vote here. A massively bigger sample size. So Twitter poll's only been up not even half an hour. Already just shy of 700 people have voted. I'm looking at it at real time. Wow, this is cool. It's like, it's actually moving like you're watching the news or something. This is awesome. Here's this Twitter stats. Now at almost 700 votes in 26 minutes of voting that's been open. And Destroyer is at 53%, Rock and Roll Over 24%, Love Gun 23%. So where on the air to you guys listening who were able to get through, Rock and Roll Over is the clear winner. And it's a dead heat between the number 2 spot between Love Gun and Destroyer. Putting it out to the masses, or at least the people that follow me, Destroyer is double what the other 2 records are. And the dead heat is between Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun. Now, tomorrow, when I get back on the air live, that poll will have a half an hour left in it because I put it up for 24 hours. So to the many who did not get through and we could not get your call because we ran out of time. And look, part of the fun of doing this is I just don't want to rifle through the phones and be like, your pick. Hearing the stories, hearing the logic, hearing, the whole thought process is what makes doing it fun as a radio show. So although I wanted to make sure I gave everybody a minute or so to make their point and say what they wanted to say. But obviously on the air, Rock and Roll Over, which was my pick as well, is the big winner. But the overall story has yet to be written, and I'll give you those numbers tomorrow. When I get on the air tomorrow, like I said, there'll be about 30 minutes left if you want to vote. Go to my Twitter, @EddieTrunk, and make your voice heard. Over 700 votes now. Destroyer still leading 52% over the other 2, locked at 24% right now. Really interesting when you open it up to the masses. Okay, thank you. This was fun. Really fun. Thank you all for your getting involved. Thank you for listening. Back live tomorrow, 3 o'clock Eastern time. We'll wrap up on this a little bit. We'll get you rock news. We'll get you calls. We'll get you whatever we want to talk about tomorrow. Rock Talk every day, live 3 to 5 Eastern time. Faction Talk 103. Trunk Nation, have a good day.